Welcome to the video. If you've been following along with this build process for me putting together this AR Wing Pro, you'll know that with this video we're getting very close to the end of the whole setup and the whole build process. And so what we're going to be taking a look at in this particular video is the systems checks, final settings, and then the stuff we need to get set up for the maiden flight prior to heading out into the field. There's a lot of things in here that we need to cover. Some of them are very simple and will take just moments to deal with and make sure that they're okay. Others take a little bit more attention and a little bit more time to make sure that they're all set up and correct. But we'll be going through all of them, and it's a pretty straightforward process. Now, to do this, of course, you're going to need to have your wing basically fully assembled. You're going to have your radio bound to it. Inav should already be installed both on your wing and on your computer so you can connect to it. Everything that you need should be installed, electronics, it should be all calibrated. You're going to also need your radio, a LiPo battery. You're going to need to have your propeller kicking around so you can take a look at it. You're going to need any gear that is going to be carried on the flying wing. So if you're going to carry a GoPro or anything else, you're going to need to have that with you. For this, you're going to need to have a place where you can connect to a GPS signal. And then you're also going to have enough space where you can have your fully assembled model, the wings attached, and still be able to attach it to your PC as well. Now, for me, some of these things about having it completely assembled make it difficult for me to do some of the video shooting. So I'll be trying to do my best to make sure that I get it captured as accurately as possible. So what are we going to do in this particular video? Well, we're going to go through each tab of Inav and make sure that every sensor we have is actually working. We're going to make sure that all the basic configurations that we need are set as they should be. We're going to check that the motor spins and that it's going the right way for the propeller that we have. We're going to make sure that our elevons work and are moving in the correct directions that they should be. We're going to check out our FPV system and make sure that that's fine. And we're going to make sure that the GPS connects and can get a full 3D fix. We're also going to take a look at the pre-Maiden setup, which will involve setting up different flight modes in Inav and matching them with our radio switches. After we set up the modes and the switches, we'll have to set up the rates and the feed forward settings. We're going to make sure that we have proper failsafe set up in the system. We're going to set up a really basic OSD so that we can see what we need to see during the first flight. We're going to take a look at the auto launch and how to set that up. And there's a lot of stuff to keep in mind when you're talking about auto launch. And then when we get to the very end of this, we're going to have to check out the center of gravity and balance to make sure that everything is balancing out the way it should be, and figure out how much weight that we might need to add to the front of the flying wing in order to keep it balanced front to back. So there's an awful lot of information to take a look at in here. And so let's switch over into Inav and connect up the flying wing and get into the whole process here. All right, so in order for me to be able to actually get a GPS signal to put my model up on a windowsill, because of that, I have the wings off and we can't do the motor testing and a few things for right now. So as we're going through this, there's going to be a couple of these tabs that I'm going to skip over temporarily. And then once I can get the model back down on my desk and underneath the camera with more space, we'll come back and take a look at some of those. As we go through this, a lot of these things we just need to check to make sure that they are set up, they are working like we expect them to do. And then there are just a few things that we need to add that we haven't set up yet. The setup page, we can see it's all here. It's got some of the information on it about our current setup. You should have all of your check marks here as being green, except perhaps navigation is safe. If currently yours has navigation safe as checked off in red, don't worry about it for right now. The calibration is the accelerometer calibration and compass calibration if you have one. If for whatever reason it is not set up properly, you need to stop right here and do the calibration steps before you continue. If you have one, this is something that you should have done a long time ago, and we're just making sure that it has been done and that it is set up properly. If for whatever reason it is not set up properly, you need to stop right here and do the calibration steps before you continue. Going on to the next tab down, we just need to check in here to make sure that it is set up as an airplane, that it's set up as a flying wing, and that these are set up as stabilized roll and pitch like we expect them to be. This is all set up previously, but we're just going through step by step to make sure that everything is as it should be. The outputs tab is one we're just loaded up right now. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. This is where we'll check the motor direction and make any changes with that if we need to. In the configuration tab, there's not an awful lot that we need to do here other than check a few things to make sure they are activated. We've got an accelerometer, it's there. If you have a compass or magnetometer, this is where it would be activated. I'm not using one in my setup, so it's not there. My barometer is set and active, and I don't have any of these other items involved. I'm using a very up-to-date flight controller, and it can handle the higher I2 square or I squared C speeds, and so you should put it up to 400 or 800 if you'll be able to manage it. And so mine can, so I'm putting it there. Down here in these other features, there are some that we need to make sure are turned on. So the very first one here is stop motors on low throttle. We want that to be turned on. We're going to turn on GPS because we're going to use it for navigation and telemetry. I want to have telemetry output turned on. These other items I'm not concerned about. Black box I'm going to turn on. And we'll turn here motor and servo output. That means the motors and the servos will then be active and we can use them. It doesn't mean they're going to start spinning. It just means the system knows that we can now use them and test them. I'm not using a CPU-based SPI. I want my OSD turned on. The air mode should be permanently turned on regardless. Just turn it on and leave it on. I'm also having launch mode permanently enabled and continuously trimming servos on a fixed wing. So that will mean as you're flying forward in level flight, it will continue to adjust the servos as it needs to maintain that flight. The others I am not going to set. If you need to set them for your case, by all means, please do. The voltage and current sensors. These, if you have a flight controller installed, you should turn them on. We don't need to change anything in here. Coming down to this battery settings part, primarily useful if you are going to be flying with exactly the same size and capacity of battery every time. And so what we can do here is if you know, for example, that you're going to be flying a 4-cell, so 4S battery, and you know that it is, like in my case here, I'm going to be using a 3300 milliamp hour battery, then I can put those settings in here and I can give it a capacity warning. So I want a warning when I've got 40% of my capacity left, and I want a critical warning when I have 20% of my capacity left in the battery. Minimum cell voltage is when it's like critical cell voltage. That's when I say I've got to come in and land. 3.5 is where I'm getting a warning, and 4.2 would be the maximum cell voltage after being charged. So you can come in and set these if you would like, but if you don't know for sure what size battery, then you may choose to just leave these as empty. That will be entirely up to you. Now I know what I'm going to be flying, so I'm setting that exactly for the battery that I have. Now down here, we get to the video transmitter section. This is where you can set through Inav and Smart Audio the VTX settings that you like to have for your video transmitter. I fly on Bosscam 4, so B4, and I just chose the power level of 3 so that it's got a power level. Having gone through all of this, set through Inav and Smart Audio the VTX settings that you like to have for your video transmitter. Now, I happen to fly on Bosscam, so B4, and I've just chosen. I fly on Bosscam 4, so B4, and I just chose the power level of 3 so that it's got a power level. Having gone through all of this, you need to set the VTX as you like it set up for whatever your settings are. Having gone all of the configuration on this page, we just save and reboot. Now, those were some fairly important settings that we had to take care of, so it's going to go through them. We'll launch back in, and we now need to take a look at the failsafe. And to do that, you're going to want to have your radio. So get your radio and turn it on. And it needs to have been bound to your model already. All we need to do in here, in this case, because we're using a flying wing, is set it as return to home. And what that will do is it will basically tell the model if it encounters a fail-safe situation, it will start to turn around, go up to a certain height, and come back to where it was originally launched from. And then when it gets there, it will do what we've asked it to do, which comes on another page of the settings. We don't need to worry about any of these other items here. Just leave them as defaults. They're a good, safe, say, a fail-safe. So we're going to set that. We're going to save it, and we're going to test it. And the way you test it is, first, you make sure that your radio is on and that it is connected through to the model here. And you can do that if you want to check. You can go to the receiver tab and you can move it up and down. So yes, you can see that it is connected. We'll go back to the fail-safe here. Okay. And what we're going to do is we are going to turn off our radio while it's connected to the model. And when we do that, up here in Inav, we should see this little parachute switch to red to tell us that it's gone into a fail-safe situation. So to do that, you'll just power off your radio.
Receiver still connected.
And even if it complains at you, just say, I don't care, turn it off.
Telemetry.
And there it went. And we can see here very quickly, the fail-safe mode went red, telling us that it has entered into fail-safe. So we know right now that the fail-safe is working. And we can turn the radio back on.
Welcome to HTX.
And momentarily, once it reestablishes connection, we'll see that the fail-safe condition is now off. And having finished the fail-safe, these next two tabs are better suited to me discussing them when I've got the model back down on the table under a different camera. So we'll take care of those a little bit later. The programming tab we don't need to even consider right now at all. When we go to the receiver, this is where we can make sure that your model here is actually talking to the radio and doing what it's supposed to do, like that. And all the switches are where you need them to be. That's something you should have taken care of previously, but let's just go back and check to be sure. The modes we're going to take a look at again with the model on the table and under a different camera, so we'll bypass that. Adjustments we don't need to worry about right now. The GPS unit, by now having had it plugged in for a little while, you can see that it's picked up 8 different satellites. It's got a 3D fix, and it's got all of the information coming in that it needs to. In here, make sure that it's set GPS for navigation and telemetry. Choose the protocol, typically U-blocks, the highest number that you can get on there. And if you're going to use a ground assistance type, leave it as auto detect. And there's no reason not to use Galileo satellites, so you might as well click them on. And then all of those things save and reboot. The very first time you start up your GPS unit, it's cold start. It's going to take a few minutes for it to acquire satellites and get a 3D fix. After that, like you can see right now, it just like almost instantaneously got a 3D fix and was able to pick up the satellites. That's a hot start. So if the very first time you plug this in, it seems to take forever to get satellites, be patient. The very first time, it can take sometimes 5, 10, even 15 minutes to get a satellite fix. The more open area you are, the less other interference you have around you, the easier it will be to get the satellite. The next two here, magnetometer or compass, I'm not using one, so I'm going to bypass. Mission control, this is for if you're planning a mission, which I'm not doing right now, so we'll bypass that. And then we'll come down to the OSD, or the on-screen display. And this is where you are going to want to have either your screen that you fly with all the time or the goggles that you fly with all the time. Because you need to confirm that how you set up everything on your screen is actually visible in your goggles. What you put onto your on-screen display is in many cases very, very personal. However, for me, this is the very first time that I'm taking a wing out. So I'm going to put on some basic things that will let me have an idea of what's going on around me, but not very much. So up here, I've got the satellites, GPS satellites that are connected so I can see how many I have. On the other side, I've got my RSSI, or my radio signal strength. And in the center, I've got a label here telling me what flight mode that I'm currently in. And then front and center, I've got system messages. Now this will typically not be there, except if there's something going wrong, and it will let me know. For example, if I don't have a GPS fix, it will be flashing me here saying no GPS fix. But once there are no system messages, that will not be there at all. On the central zone here, I have a few things that will just give me an idea of what's going on with the craft at any given time. The first line here is the throttle position, so how much throttle I'm actually applying at that moment. This here is the current draw, how many amps are being used at that moment, and the current ground speed from the GPS unit at that moment. So this should tell me, how fast I'm going, how much power is being used, and how much throttle is being applied to achieve that. On the other side, I've got my current altitude and my current distance from home. In the center, I've got the artificial horizon and the home direction. On the bottom left, I simply have the single cell voltage and the overall milliamp hours that have been consumed. So that will give me a pretty good idea of how much battery capacity I have left. On the other side, I simply have my flight time, which in this case is basically from when I arm it until it comes back down and I disarm. And then my pilot name and this particular craft name. For now, that's all I am going to have on my OSD. I fly analog video, and I know that my camera is a PAL setup. So you need to make sure that you choose what's right for you if you're flying analog. You can leave it as auto, which is fine. I prefer to choose the one that I'm using. And right here is this preview guides. And it's quite important because what you see here, that green line, that is the difference between an NTSC screen and a PAL screen. So there's quite a difference in visual real estate vertically here between the two. And so this is why you need to have either your screen that you fly with or the goggles. It's that once you have this set up, you can save it, you can turn on your goggles and make sure that all of those things are visible in your goggles and on your screen where you want them to be. Okay. If you're putting stuff on there and you see that these all look strange or the fonts aren't quite right or you're getting strange characters in here, Just open up the font manager and upload a font. Typically the default is what many people will do. So if you're having any issues with your fonts not showing clearly, use the font manager to upload the fonts to make them clean again. Once you've done that, you can save it and that will take care of it. You need to set up the OSD the way that you need to set it up for your comfort and how you want it, and whatever you need to be able to see. But for me, this is how I'm going to do it. LED strip, I'm not going to have. Other sensors, this just shows us that they are active. The gyroscope, accelerometer, and barometer. You can see that they're being read and data is being taken from them. And then tethered logging, black box, I'm not worried about at all for my first flight. And so those we can just leave for now. So for right now, we've gone through everything that we could do, with this model being set up where it is like that. And so we need to take it down, get it underneath the other setup, camera setup, and take a look at a few of these other items that we bypassed on this first pass through. So that's where we'll be heading next.